Okay, picture this. It's September 20th, 1926. Cicero, Illinois. It's the middle of the day, right? And Al Capone is sitting in the restaurant of the Hawthorne Hotel, probably eating lunch, maybe a nice plate of spaghetti, feeling untouchable. Suddenly, the street outside explodes. And I don't mean a little pop, pop, pop. I mean a convoy of 10 cars rolls up. 10 cars! And they unleash literal hell. We are talking about 1,000 rounds of ammunition, Tommy guns, shotguns, the works. They turn the hotel lobby into Swiss cheese. The woodwork is splintered, the windows are shattered, the air is just thick with lead and smoke. It is an unprecedented display of firepower, something straight out of a war movie. And here is the kicker, the absolute punchline to this insane joke. Nobody died. Not a single person. 1,000 bullets, 0 bodies. It was the bloodless massacre, a perfect metaphor for the chaotic, incompetent, terrifying, and frankly bizarre world of the forgotten felons before Capone. That's right. Today, we aren't just talking about Scarface. We are digging up the graves of the lunatics who paved the road for him. You heard me right. We are diving deep into the forgotten felons before Capone. Because while history likes to put all the spotlight on Big Al, the year 1926 was actually crawling with characters who were quite frankly way scarier and definitely weirder. We're talking about the guys who invented the one-way ride. We're talking about psychopaths who hallucinated green snakes while firing machine guns into the night. We've got a serial killer dubbed the Gorilla Man terrorizing the West Coast, and a witness in the trial of the century who testified from a hospital bed right in the middle of the courtroom while her own mother heckled her. This isn't the sanitized, glamorous roaring 20s you see in the movies. This is the dirty, gritty, blood-soaked reality. So, why should you stick around? Because by the end of this video, you are going to have a complete map of the underworld that actually built the modern mafia. You're going to find out why the Peaky Blinders TV show has been lying to you about 1926. You'll learn about the only man Al Capone was genuinely terrified of. And I promise you, you will have the best dinner party anecdotes about 1920s psychopaths that anyone has ever heard. We are peeling back the curtain on the year that changed crime forever. It's messy, it's violent, and it's, honestly, kind of hilarious in a dark, twisted way. So, grab a drink, maybe some giggle water if we're being authentic, and let's get into the architecture of anarchy. Let's start across the pond, shall we? Because 1926 wasn't just popping off in Chicago. Over in England, things were getting incredibly tense. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're picturing Cillian Murphy in a perfectly tailored suit, walking through smoke in slow motion with a razor blade sewn into his cap. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, friend, but by 1926, that version of the Peaky Blinders was dead and buried. The idea of the razor in the cap? Total myth. Disposable razor blades were a luxury item back then. No street thug is stitching a Gillette into his hat. It's impractical. You'd cut your own thumb off trying to take it off your head. The real sloggers of Birmingham had evolved. By 26, they weren't street fighters anymore. They were corporatized. They were the Birmingham Boys, and they were led by a guy who makes the fictional Tommy Shelby look like a choir boy. Meet William Billy Kimber. In the show, he's this sort of posh, whiny guy who gets shot in the head. In reality, Billy Kimber was a brass caster turned gang lord, and he was a terrifying human being. He wasn't a master strategist sitting in a dark room brooding. He was a loud, physically massive thug who believed in overwhelming force. He led the Birmingham Boys, or the Brummagem Boys if you want to sound local. These guys controlled the racecourse protection rackets across the Midlands and the North. See, back then the racecourse was where the money was. Cash businesses, open fields, very few cops. It was the Wild West with horses. And Kimber? He was the sheriff of chaos. He didn't use a razor, he used a hammer or a brick. Subtlety wasn't really his thing. To give you an idea of how these guys operated, we have to talk about the Epsom Road Battle. This actually happened a few years prior, but it set the stage for 26. Kimber's guys, armed with hammers, hatchets, and bricks, literal bricks, folks, ambush a bus, or a charabanc, that they think is full of their rivals, the Sabini gang. They swarm this bus, smashing it to pieces. Insane bloodlust, the witnesses said. But here's the punchline. They attacked the wrong bus. They were beating up the Leeds crowd, who were actually their own allies. One of the victims literally shouted, "Stop it, we're the Leeds mob!" And the Birmingham attacker, hammer in hand, apparently just shrugged and said, "Well, they'll be murder done today anyway," and kept swinging. That is the level of disorganized crime we are dealing with here. It's like the Three Stooges, but with severe head trauma. So fast forward to May 1926. Britain is paralyzed. The general strike. It's a huge deal in history books. Miners, transport workers, everyone walks out. The country stops. The government is terrified of a Bolshevik revolution. They're rolling armored cars down Oxford Street. It's wild. But while the politicians are sweating bullets, the gangsters, they are seeing dollar signs, or pound signs, I guess. See, chaos is a ladder, right? And the Sabini gang, Kimber's arch rivals down in London, they climbed that ladder like Olympic athletes. The police were so busy watching the strikers that the racecourse gangs could basically do whatever they wanted. They were moving black market goods, extorting bookies, and fixing odds, all while the cops were distracted by the unions. And here is the twist that you definitely won't see in a glorified TV drama. The gangs weren't just profiting from the strike. Some of them were hired to break it. You had these notorious London hard men, guys who would slice you up for looking at them wrong, suddenly being deputized as special constables or hired muscle to protect food convoys. Imagine that. You're a striking coal miner, you're starving, you're fighting for a living wage, and the guy swinging a baton at you is a known racecourse extortionist named Darby Sabini. It's surreal. The government needed bodies to keep the trucks moving, and the mob was happy to oblige, for a price, of course. It blurs the line between the law and the lawless until you can't even see it anymore. Now here's a little nugget of gold that I love. Remember Billy Kimber, the Birmingham hammer enthusiast? Well, as the heat turned up in England and the Sabinis started winning the war, Billy reportedly took a little vacation to America. There are these persistent stories backed by family lore and some records that Kimber fled to the U.S. in the mid-20s. He went to Arizona, Los Angeles, and eventually, you guessed it, Chicago. Legend has it he was sheltered by Murray the Camel Humphreys, who was one of Capone's top guys. Just imagine that crossover episode. The Brummagem hard man comparing notes with Al Capone's machine gunners. You use a hammer? That's cute. Check out this typewriter. It shows you that this underworld was global way before we had the internet. Crime was the original World Wide Web. Before we jump across the Atlantic to the blood-soaked streets of Chicago, I have to ask you guys something about another 1926 mystery. You know Agatha Christie, the queen of crime fiction? Well, in December 1926, she vanished, disappeared. Found her car hanging over a chalk pit. She turned up 11 days later claiming amnesia, but she had checked into a hotel using the name of her husband's mistress. So here is my question for the comments. Was it a genuine fugue state, a medical episode, or was it the ultimate gangster move, a calculated revenge plot to frame her cheating husband for murder? Let me know what you think down below. Gone Girl has nothing on Agatha. All right, let's go to Chicago. Everyone knows Al Capone. He's the mascot of the 1920s. But in 1926, Capone wasn't sleeping well. And the reason for his insomnia was a man named Fall of Hymie Weiss. If Capone was the corporate CEO of crime, Weiss was the feral genius. He was the leader of the North Side Gang, and he was the only man Al Capone truly feared. Why? Because Weiss didn't care about business. He cared about revenge. He was this volatile mix of devout Catholicism and absolute brutality. The guy carried a rosary and a revolver in the same pocket. He went to mass every single day, and then he'd go out and pistol whip election officials. He was a walking contradiction, and he was absolutely terrifying. You have to love the audacity of this guy. Weiss once sued the federal government, sued them, to get back some silk shirts and socks he claimed the marshals stole during a raid on his apartment. Can you imagine the chutzpah? Being a known hitman and dragging the U.S. Marshals to small claims court over your laundry? He had this dark, fatalistic sense of humor, too. A friend of his was once envious of Weiss's wealth, the flashy suits and the cash, and Weiss just looked at him dead in the eye and said, "I'll trade places with you." He knew he was a dead man walking. He knew he wasn't making it to old age, and that made him dangerous because he had nothing to lose. Weiss is also credited with inventing one of the most chilling innovations in mob history, the one-way ride. Before this, if you wanted to whack someone, you maybe ambush them in an alley. Weiss perfected the friendly lure. You get the guy into the car, you tell him you're going to a meeting or a party, and then pop. He never gets out. The automobile became a mobile execution chamber. It changed the game. It made murder portable, intimate, and inescapable. And it was all Hymie's brainchild. He was an innovator, just, an evil one. And where did he plan all this carnage? A flower shop. I'm not joking. The Schofield Flower Shop on North State Street. It was the North Side Gang's headquarters. Dean O'Banion, the former boss, used to be a florist. He actually arranged flowers for the funerals of the guys he killed, which is a level of customer service you just don't see anymore. Weiss turned the place into a fortress. Just picture it. The smell of fresh chrysanthemums, the beautiful bouquets, and a bunch of guys in the back room loading drum magazines for a Tommy gun. It's so cinematic you'd think it was fake, but it was real life in 1926. But Weiss's masterpiece, his magnum opus, was the Hawthorne Hotel Raid on September 20th, 1926. This is the event that should be in every movie. Weiss wants Capone dead. Capone is holed up in the Hawthorne Hotel in Cicero, using it as his fortress. So Weiss organizes a convoy, 10 cars, a literal motorcade of death. They drive into Cicero in broad daylight. It's a military operation. The first car drives past the hotel and fires blanks. Blanks. Why? To draw Capone and his men to the windows. Hey, what's that noise? They look out, and then the rest of the convoy arrives. And then the world ends. The next 9 cars unleash hell. They pump over 1,000 rounds into the hotel. They shred the lobby. They destroy the restaurant. A guy even gets out of one of the cars, walks up to the front door with a Tommy gun, and empties a drum magazine into the hallway. It was mechanized warfare on an American street. It was designed to send a message, "We can touch you anywhere." It was the 20s equivalent of a drone strike. But here is the funniest, most ironic part of the whole story. Despite the 1,000 bullets, despite the military precision, despite the absolute destruction of the property, nobody died. Al Capone was saved because his bodyguard tackled him to the floor. The only casualty was a civilian woman who got a little glass in her eye. 1,000 shots. Stormtroopers have better aim than these guys. It was humiliating for Weiss. It was a bloodless massacre. But it terrified Capone. It showed him that Weiss was crazy enough to do anything. And that meant Weiss had to go. And go he did. Less than a month later, October 11th, Capone's boys got him. They set up a sniper's nest in a rooming house across from the Holy Name Cathedral. As Weiss walked down the street, probably checking his pockets for his rosary, they cut him down with a submachine gun. The shooting was so ferocious that bullets chipped the cornerstone of the cathedral. You can actually still see the marks there today. It's a permanent scar on the church, a little souvenir from the year the gangsters went to war with God's house in the crossfire. Now, if you think Weiss was bad, let me introduce you to Frank McErlane. If Weiss was a strategist, McErlane was just a straight-up psychopath. He's the guy crime historians point to and say, Yeah, that's the most brutal gunman of the era. He operated on the South Side, and his contribution to history, he is widely credited as the first gangster to use a Thompson submachine gun in a hit. Before Frank, it was shotguns and pistols. Frank picked up a Tommy gun and said, "I can kill way more people with this." He was an innovator of terror. When he first used that Tommy gun to try and kill a rival named Spike O'Donnell, the police didn't even know what happened. They showed up and saw the damage and thought, "What was this? A machine rifle? A platoon of soldiers?" They couldn't comprehend that one guy could cause that much destruction. Frank ushered in the era of the Chicago typewriter. But Frank had a problem. Frank liked to drink. And when Frank drank, his face would turn beet red, a literal red flag to everyone around him to run for cover. See, Frank suffered from alcoholic psychosis, which is a fancy way of saying he saw things. In 1926, and again later, he was found wandering the streets drunk out of his mind, firing a shotgun at imaginary green snakes and pink elephants. Imagine living in that neighborhood. You look out your window, and there's the most dangerous hitman in Chicago waging war against hallucinations. It's funny in a cartoonish way until you remember he was holding a loaded shotgun. And it wasn't just snakes. Frank's brutality was domestic. This is the part that isn't funny. In 1931, he was driving with his common-law wife and her 2 German shepherds. The dogs started barking. Frank got annoyed. He pulled over, dragged the dogs out, and shot them. Then he shot his wife. Just like that. Even other gangsters were like, "Frank, that is too much." He eventually died of pneumonia, penniless and delirious, shooting at invisible enemies in his hospital bed. A pathetic end for a monster. Then you had the terrible Jennas, 6 brothers. The Jenna brothers controlled Little Italy, and they were the kings of the alky cookers. They didn't just have a brewery, they employed hundreds of Sicilian families to cook alcohol in their own tenement homes. They paid them $15 a day, which was a fortune. But these stills were ticking bombs. They would explode constantly, killing the families, burning down buildings. The Jennas didn't care. It was just overhead to them. They churned out this rot-gut giggle water and flooded the city with it. And when they died, oh boy did they go out in style. When Angelo, Bloody Angelo Jenna, was killed, his funeral was a spectacle. A $6,000 bronze casket. That's like $100,000 today. He was covered in a purple robe to hide the bullet holes. And the flowers. $75,000 worth of flowers. Ironically, most of them were bought from Dean O'Banion's flower shop, the guy that Jennas helped kill. Talk about brand loyalty. One mourner at the cemetery famously looked at the Jenna graves and said, "When Judgment Day comes and those graves open, there's gonna be hell to pay in this cemetery." You can say that again. We've talked about gangsters, but 1926 also gave us something arguably worse. The first modern serial sex killer. They didn't have the term serial killer yet, so the press called him the Gorilla Man. His real name was Earl Nelson. This guy was a nightmare. He traveled the newly built highways and railways, hopping from city to city, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. He was utilizing the infrastructure of the Roaring Twenties to hunt. Nelson's MO was consistent and chilling. He targeted landladies. He'd look for room for rent signs, pose as a pious Christian borderer. He carried a well-worn Bible and quoted the book of Revelation constantly. And then he'd strangle them. But he was weird, like deeply bizarre. He was obsessed with his feet. He would bathe by pouring glasses of water over his toes. He could lift heavy furniture with his teeth. He was a psychotic prodigy with a history of head trauma. In 1926 alone, he killed at least 9 women. He terrorized the entire West Coast, and the police couldn't catch him because they weren't used to a killer who moved so fast. And finally, we cannot talk about 1926 without the trial of the century, the Hall Mills murder case. A priest and his choir singer mistress found dead. The trial happened in 26, and it was a media circus that makes the OJ trial look like a library session. The star witness for the prosecution was a woman named Jane Gibson, known by the press as the Pig Woman because, well, she raised pigs. She was terminally ill, so they rolled her into the courtroom on a hospital bed, a literal hospital bed. So there she is, the Pig Woman, lying in bed in court, telling this crazy story about riding her mule, Jenny, through a lover's lane at night to catch corn thieves and stumbling upon the murder. It's absurd. And the best part, her own mother was sitting in the front row heckling her. Her mom is shouting, "She's a liar, 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 liar." The defendants were acquitted mostly because the prosecution's case relied on a woman on a mule and a hospital bed. It was the peak of 1920 sensationalism, bizarre, tragic, and completely unforgettable. And just quickly, we can't forget Sister Amy Semple McPherson, huge celebrity evangelist. She disappears from a beach in 1926, presumed drowned. Memorial services are held, people are weeping. 5 weeks later, she walks out of the Mexican desert not a hair out of place, shoes perfectly shined, claiming she was kidnapped by a duo named Steve and Rose. Yeah, Steve and Rose. Journalists poked holes in her story immediately, like, "Amy, why aren't your shoes scuffed if you walked through the desert?" It was almost certainly a cover for a romantic affair with her radio engineer. But her followers bought it. It was the original fake news scandal. Let's end on a lighter note, a story that sums up the weird mix of terror and fun of 1926. Jazz legend Fats Waller. He's playing a gig in Chicago. Suddenly, 4 guys with guns bundle him into a limo. Fats thinks, "This is it, I'm dead. The one-way ride." He's sweating bullets. The car stops, they drag him out, push him through a door, and he's at a surprise birthday party for Al Capone. The kidnapping was a request. Fats played piano for 3 days straight. He left with thousands of dollars in tips stuffed in his pockets and a massive hangover. Only in 1926, folks. Only in 1926. So, there you have it, 1926. It wasn't just the year of the Charleston. It was the year the underworld professionalized. It was the year street thugs became CEOs. The year the Tommy gun became the brush criminals used to paint the town red. And the year the line between celebrity and infamy completely dissolved. Capone might be the face on the poster, but guys like Hymie Weiss, Frank McErlane, and Billy Kimber were the ones writing the script. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forgotten felons of the Roaring Twenties, do me a favor, smash that like button like Billy Kimber smashing a charabanc with a hammer. Subscribe for more dark history and let me know in the comments which of these 1926 lunatics would you least like to meet in a dark alley. I'm going with Frank Greensnake's Frank McErlane personally. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.